UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Welcome to Franchise Fatigue, the little podcast on the United Federation of Podcast Network, where your hosts talk about movies, sequels, remakes, all of it in glorious 3D. Dun, 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 dun. Joining me today, as always, is my ever constant baby shark, Zach Moore.
Baby shark, I'm the baby shark.
Have you seen us standing next to each other? I am definitely the big shark.
I've said this before, not on this podcast, but when I met Brandon for the first time at Star Trek Las Vegas, if anyone has seen Star Trek 6, the scene where Kirk is in Repente and he sees the big alien who likes his coat, I felt like Kirk and Brandon was like that big alien.
Yeah, and Zach also kicked me in the knee balls as well.
That is a different alien, but I did understand your reference. But yes, that's your size proportions of me and Brandon. So I am the baby shark, but we also have there's only two sharks in the movie, John. So we got John Mills. What's up, John? Thanks for coming back on the show.
I'm the guy who got mauled closing the gate.
You are Tom Selleck, as I will refer to him in this podcast.
He does look like Tom Selleck. You're right.
Is that your wife coming into your podcasting room throwing your luggage at you because she's mad because she thinks you're like out and about?
We'll get to that. But like seriously, days before cell phones, it was easier to disappear and lose track of people.
Apparently.
So, there you go.
Well, in case you guys haven't figured out what we're talking about tonight, we are talking about Jaws 3D, which is the third entry in the glorious Jaws saga. And this has been a fun journey, and it's going to be interesting to talk about this one here because cat's out of the bag. This movie's not very good. So
yeah, it's disappointing, and to say the least. But John, just so we get some context, because we had Kintrip on the last two episodes, you're coming on for the next two to close out the Jaws franchise. Where do you stand on Jaws? Do you think Jaws is one of the greatest films of all time, as you should? And how far has the franchise come from there to now?
Well, how could I not agree that Jaws is one of the greatest films ever created? It's an absolute marvel. It's better than the book. Like people love to say, oh, the book is better. No. Jaws on screen is 1,000 times better than the book because the characters are actually likable and they're interesting. And I adore Jaws. I have yet to encounter anybody who doesn't, and I think that's with good reason. Specifically so that I could spend this time with you gentlemen. I had gone through my entire life never seeing a single one of the Jaws sequels. And so I've now caught myself up because I felt that I'd be lost coming into Jaws 3 without watching Jaws 2. Which,
no, you wouldn't have been.
No, I wouldn't have been.
It might have made more sense. It might have.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that Jaws 2 was an odd experience because I realized that I had seen the end, like this memory came flooding back that I had seen the ending on television when I was really, really young before I ever saw the first Jaws. And then that triggered another memory why the first time I saw Jaws, I was confused and said, oh, I thought I'd seen the ending. This is totally different. That must have been a different movie. And then I saw Jaws 2 and I went, oh, that's why I got confused. Yeah, I didn't love Jaws 2. So I was really curious how I was going to react to Jaws 3D, considering people talk more lowly of Jaws 3D than they do of Jaws 2. So there you go.
Was there a particular reason that you didn't want to see the sequels?
Yes, because I loved Jaws. And after that ending, I said to myself, there's absolutely no way you can justify a sequel. There's nothing here for you to possibly do with a shark that's going, like we've had the best. What on earth are you going to do to follow
Yeah.
this up?
You didn't have your Darth Vader spinning out of control, escaping from the Death Star explosion at the end of Jaws, which led you on to watch a sequel to Star Wars as opposed to that one.
Now,
Correct.
what if Jaws the shark was spinning out of control in the ocean after that? The oxygen tank, instead of exploding him, just sent him shooting off like...
Spinning in circles, going away. Yeah, then I could see a Jaws 2.
Okay.
It would have been a perplexing ending, but I could have seen that. Sure. Yeah.
There it is. Well, anyway, but before we jump into our discussion about Jaws 3D, as always, I have some trivia for us. And Jaws 3, it was the highest grossing opening weekend for a 3D film until Spy Kids 3D came out in 2003. So for 20 years, this had the record for that. Now, it made $13 million and change in its opening weekend in 1983, and Spy Kids made $33 million and change in its opening weekend in 2003. Now, 3D kind of died out after the mid-'80s. You know, Friday the 13th was doing it. All these movies were trying to do 3D, and that it's a cyclical phase. It's like every 20 or 30 years, 3D comes and goes, as we've saw in the early 2000s as well. But anyway, I just thought that was an interesting stat that it held that record for so long. Now, David Brown and Richard Zanuck, the producers of the first two films, they originally pitched this as a spoof titled National Lampoon's Jaws 3 People Zero. And it was going to be about a movie studio trying to make another sequel to Jaws, and it was going to open up with Peter Benchley being eaten in his pool by a shark. All kinds of absurdities, but Steven Spielberg eventually got wind of this and put his foot down and rejected the idea. And said if they were going to do that movie, he would leave Universal Studios. So they're like, okay, well, we need to keep Steven Spielberg around. So at least they have the sense to not do that.
I just want to interrupt, Zach, and say that I am crowdfunding that movie immediately as soon as we are done podcasting this. I'm going to write that tonight, and we are going to make that film.
I mean, I got to say it would probably have been more enjoyable than this one. But we have Joe Alves as the director of Jaws 3. It's the only film he ever directed. He was the production designer on Jaws and Jaws 2, and was also the second unit director for Jaws 2. And he was very instrumental in the designing the shark in the original films, so that gave him some credence into why he would be the director here. And he was also recommended to be the director by Verna Fields, who won an Oscar for editing the first Jaws. So, if you're not going to get Steven Spielberg and you're not going to get Jenna Swark, I guess this guy was a decent enough option to go with, but we'll discuss that as we go. And speaking of, the Jaws franchise, with Jaws 3 here, right, there are some similarities to another franchise we've discussed, Brandon, on a different podcast, and John, you've discussed it with us as well, the Halloween franchise. Because Halloween 3 and Jaws 3 have a few things in common. Those big movies launched careers of successful directors. They went to a new disconnected locale for the third film. There was no returning actors between the first two and the third film. The second film, for better or for worse, was more of a beat-for-beat remix of the first film, while the third one went in a radically different direction. Mm-hmm. And Halloween 3 was directed by Tom Lee Wallace, who was the production designer for the original Halloween. And Joe Alves was the production designer for Jaws. So there are some interesting similarities there between these two franchises.
Halloween 3 is better than Jaws 3.
Halloween 3 is light years better than Jaws 3. There is no debate about that.
That's that is one heck of a statement, and it's also true. We finally found the metric by which I will heap praise upon Halloween 3.
There it is. We found it. There we go. I know you would appreciate that, John.
Yes, I do.
Now, although most of this film, all the scenes were shot in SeaWorld, most of the scenes were shot in the actual SeaWorld in Florida where the film took place. Some environments depicted in the film do not exist in the actual theme park, such as the underwater kingdom or undersea kingdom where people can go get trapped.
I will also point out, as somebody who lives in Central Florida, a scant 30 minutes from SeaWorld, we're nowhere near an ocean. There is no ocean for us to open up a gate to let sharks in. the shark would have to travel overland for quite some time before it got to SeaWorld. So I just want to, if anybody's saying, oh my gosh, I could get eaten by, no, it's an impossibility what happens in this movie. It is in fact surrounded by parking lots and highways.
Some would say it's impossible for a shark to go from the northeastern waters to the Bahamas. But that's a conversation for another podcast.
Still more believable, trust me.
Okay, fair enough. I think it might be a theme here when we talk about Jaws 3 versus Jaws 4, but we'll see. Now, this was a very interesting casting almost to me. David Warner was offered the role of Philip Fitzroyce, which I think would have been really cool.
Wow.
I mean, I love David Warner. I love him from his work on Star Trek. He's Chancellor Gorkon. He's Gul Madred. He's St. John Talbot. Also, Jack the Ripper. And Time and Again? Is that the
Time After Time?
Time After Time. Time and Again is a
Yeah.
Voyager episode. But he's in Nicholas Meyer's Time After Time. He played Jack the Ripper opposite Malcolm McDowell's H.G. Wells. So I love David Warner. Would have been great to see him instead of the Crocodile Dundee ripoff we got in this film, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Lou Gossett Jr., he actually appeared in Peter Benchley's The Deep. I know we were talking about some of Peter Benchley's other movie versions of his novels. This is the second Peter Benchley movie, so to speak. Benchley didn't write this. It was based off characters created by Peter Benchley, as we see in the credits. But Lou Gossett Jr. had that connection there. And this is Lee Thompson's feature film debut, and I must say she is one of the true highlights of the film, I think, seeing her in her youth.
I absolutely agree. She is the highlight.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. According to Roy Schneider's biography by Diane Kachmar, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but she's the one who wrote his biography. Schneider said, quote, Mephistopheles couldn't talk me into doing Jaws 3. They knew better than to even ask. So he even went out of his way to make sure he signed on to a film to ensure he was definitely and contractually unavailable to do Jaws 3. And that film was Blue Thunder, which also came out in 1983. Because, as we had talked about, he did Jaws 2 kind of, begrudgingly. He didn't want to do it, but he wanted to get out of his contracts with Universal. So he did it, and he was never looking back after that. Of course, he did go do Sequest, which is arguably very similar to Jaws in some ways, but that's a conversation for another time as well. One of the dolphins in the film, the female dolphin called Sandy, is actually a male dolphin named Capricorn, and he currently lives in Discovery Cove, which is owned by SeaWorld Orlando. And he still has interactions with guests, like giving them rides and doing tricks. And Capricorn is 50 years old.
Wow.
We should see if we can interview him for the podcast.
I want to go find him because I have passes to SeaWorld. I'd love to go and hey, he was in Jaws 3. It'd be awesome.
Yeah, I bet that's a real selling point. We actually have here one of the dolphins from Jaws 3D. What we speaking of Sequest, we need that little voice box that Darwin the dolphin has on Sequest in order to communicate with him. So,
no, you just need the blonde guy. What's his name?
Jonathan Brandis is no longer with us, so you're going to have to rely on that technology. I'm sorry. So,
I didn't know that.
Yes, thanks for bringing down the mood, Brandon. Thank you.
Too soon.
Just trying to have some fun and just buzzing with Buzzkill. Last couple of pieces of trivia here. The shark was 35 feet long in this film, which is 10 feet longer than the shark in the previous two films. And much like the first two Jaws films, the violence was going to push it to an R rating. But they cut down some of the effects, like the sound effects, like bone crunching and other more graphic things, to get it down to a PG. But when it came out on home video in the UK, it was upgraded back up to a 15, which is their equivalent of a rated R movie. So it's widely considered the most violent of the series, which it might be the most gory based on like some of the body parts and stuff, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily the most violent. But there you have it. There's your Jaws 3 trivia. Less trivia than in the last two movies, and less movie as well, if you ask me. But John, you're our guest. You waited your entire life to see Jaws 3. Did it live up to your low expectations?
It exceeded my low expectations. Like, if exceeded is the right word, it's a marvel. It's one of those things where, like, at the end of it, I felt like you should have sent a poet. There are no words for how bad this is. It's really, it's one of those things where I almost disconnected halfway through where I had to start paying attention to the more technical stuff, like the fact that SeaWorld Orlando is nowhere near an ocean. So I'm sitting there, well, there is a SeaWorld in California. Maybe that one has access to an ocean. I think that's, and so like I'm looking up. I'm like,